Our main character is Mrs. Honey Stapleton. She got married 7 months ago to a rich older man named Weaver. Emphasis on older. He is 51 and she's 23. Ew, he's more than twice her age.
Argo Font Book Review, Argo Font Book Review.
Weaver is the worst. He's uptight and picky, he complains about everything, and he bosses his wife around so he can have something else to complain about. He claims that he's terribly sick, but in this case, terribly sick means he's terrible and Honey is sick of dealing with him. This is not what she expected marriage to be like. They're on a cruise to the West Indies. There's a mix-up with their cabins, so they find another man in their cabin. He is Captain Hilary Lachelle. I don't know why they call him captain, because he's not the ship's captain. Maybe he's a military man? Either way, I was minorly confused by the character captain, because 2/3 of the time, captain refers to him, and 1/3 of the time, captain refers to the actual captain of the cruise. So there was unnecessary confusion there. Captain moves to the room next door. He accidentally leaves behind a love letter for his wife. He's going to meet her halfway through the cruise. But at dinner, Captain is on a honeymoon with his wife, Alma. So what's going on? Does Captain have 2 wives? Alma is beset by a series of misfortunes. She almost missed the cruise by less than a minute because somebody called her with the wrong departure time. Her luggage is lost, her food tastes funny, all her jewels are stolen, only to be found later in her dressing table. It's almost like someone is sabotaging her and they don't want her on this trip. Honey plans to leave for a nighttime shore excursion, but she changes her mind at the last minute. She sees a big woman named Mrs. Condy come on board. Mrs. Condy has ruined clothes that used to be fancy, and her teeth have lipstick stains. Weaver secretly meets with Mrs. Condy in her cabin, and he can't stop laughing at her dirty jokes. It's totally unlike him. Maybe Captain isn't the only one here with a secret wife. When Honey asks Weaver where he was, he lies and says he was in the library. Alma says she's sick and feels terrible. The doctor insists that she's being dosed with something. Honey talks with Alma. Turns out she takes a special vitamin elixir every day. Honey suspects Captain is poisoning her vitamins. Weaver thinks that idea is disgusting, and he refuses to talk about it anymore. He has a joyful lunch with Mrs. Condy. Captain makes it clear he thinks Honey is being nosy and he doesn't want her visiting his wife anymore. Is he just being protective, or does he have something to hide? Weaver disappears. Honey thinks he might be in Mrs. Condy's cabin again. When she checks, Mrs. Condy is dead. We know she's dead because her eyes are open and her face is covered with cigarette ashes. Later, Mr. Basingly, the purser, meets with Honey and explains Mrs. Condy isn't dead, she was just sleeping. And Mrs. Condy left with all of her luggage, so no one needs to worry about her again. When Honey insists that Mrs. Condy was murdered, Basingly just smiles at her. It's creepy. Weaver refuses to listen to her murder theory, and Honey has a nervous breakdown while trying to fall asleep that night. She can't handle lying down in the dark. She wakes up to discover Weaver moved out to a different cabin. Honey believes he's trying to say their marriage is over and he's going to divorce her once the trip is done. I thought Honey was jumping to dramatic conclusions here. She approaches the subject with Weaver a few times, but they have such terrible communication issues, it's hard to tell one way or the other if he still wants to be married to her. There's a handsome man named Michael. Honey is emotionally attracted to him as he's the only one who understands her. Without saying anything, they both acknowledge they like each other, but nothing will happen between them. That's as romantic as this book gets. I don't know why Harlequin republished this book as a romance novel. It's clearly not a romance. Michael warns Honey to stop her investigation because he doesn't want her to get hurt. And Mr. Perez claims he saw Mrs. Condy leave the ship alive. It's pretty obvious he's lying. Perez also warns Honey to forget Condy's death, before she becomes the next victim. Honey sends a radio message to the hotel that Mrs. Condy allegedly checked into. The hotel messages back saying Mrs. Condy never arrived. That's official proof that the cover story is false and Mrs. Condy did get murdered. Sadly, Honey isn't able to use this proof to do anything, because it doesn't come in until right before the big finale. Honey sees Alma with a bloody wound. She tries raising the alarm, but no one believes her. They believe Captain, who said Alma fell out of bed and bumped her head. He makes a big show out of the fact that she's okay, nothing to see here, please leave us alone now. Weaver becomes a likely suspect. It's revealed one of his visiting cards was found at the crime scene, and about 10 years ago he was committed at a clinic for severe alcoholism. At the same time, it's revealed that Weaver is frightened of Honey's outbursts about the murder. He's worried she's hysterical and violent, and clearly everyone else agrees with him. The Lachelle's announce they're leaving for Rio tomorrow. Honey is desperate to prove Captain's guilt before he leaves, so she comes up with a really terrible plan. That is, she steals drugs and slips them into Alma's coffee. That way, everyone will know Captain is a villain who's secretly drugging his wife. That is illegal and dangerous and does not prove Captain's guilt in the slightest. A policeman catches Honey stealing the drugs, but he dismisses her as a desperate attention seeker who's trying to create a fake emergency. That's not how you want the police to react when you tell them about a murder. Someone ransacks Honey's room. Alma comes inside and says it's payoff for drugging her coffee. Alma noticed and switched cups with Captain, who's now passed out in bed. Alma is the murderer. She killed Mrs. Condy because she was Captain's secret wife. Captain covered up the murder, and he's trying to blackmail Alma over it. Alma considers killing Captain and framing Honey. After all, Honey did drug his coffee. Honey tries to escape and Alma punches her. Honey manages to get past Alma and into the hallway. She runs to Weaver, who refuses to leave his room to help save her life. What a terrible husband. Luckily, 2 other passengers hear the commotion. They come out to help, saving Honey and Captain from death. But not Weaver. When someone breaks into Weaver's room, he collapses and dies from fright. I can't help but think Alma drugged him, and that is the payoff she mentioned earlier. Honey is too shocked by Weaver's death to do anything. Michael convinces her to let Captain and Alma leave in peace. One of them is bound to kill the other. He sends a message to the police in Rio so they can arrest the survivor. The end. Post-book follow-up. You could argue this is a traditional murder mystery, but the book is classified as a psychological suspense novel. There is a slow build-up to the final third, where no one believes Honey's claims about murder. They think she's a liar, or crazy, or dangerous, or some combination of the 3. Honey gets more and more desperate as things continue. I would say the psychological suspense is very well done. You definitely feel her isolation and fear. Readers can legitimately question if Honey is right, or if she's disturbed. There is a downside to the setup, though. Thanks to the slow build-up, the book is slow. There are definitely places where the book lost my interest, like the one shore excursion and the 4 chapters between the jewelry theft and the murder. After the murder, the pace picks up, but if this book were to drop the psychological fears in favor of pure suspense, I'd say about a quarter of it could be removed. There is casual racism in this book. Perez and all the other servants are people of color. Only one of them speaks normal English. The others have heavy accents. Perez is a, quote, hot-blooded Latin, end quote, which means he flirts with women nonstop. Michael, the only good male character in this book, is described as brown, so he's the only person of color who's not a racist stereotype. I wonder if he and Honey date each other after the book ends. That seems like the way their relationship would go. Overall, it's a decent mystery and a better suspense story. The title is a clever play on the phrase lady killer, because the killer is a lady in this case. I liked most of it, except the slow parts, and the parts with Weaver. Weaver was the worst, to the point where I was secretly glad he was killed in the end. I give Harlequin Romance number 60, Lady Killer, an 8 out of 10.